All right, so last of these four types of legislation are bills. And there are relatively fewer bills than there have been in the past. We talked about this the other day. I said, for one reason, you can have unlimited co-sponsors on a bill. Remember, they used to have 25 sponsors on a bill, and then they had to reintroduce a duplicate bill. So that's one reason why there's fewer bills. Another reason is the increased use of these sort of all-encompassing so-called omnibus bills. So these bills in which they add a whole bunch of different variety of things into them. And so rather than having a bunch of individual bills, they'll have one big bill that has a bunch of smaller bills in it. One of the reasons for doing this is that some bills are relatively unpopular, and by packaging them into this one big all-or-nothing kind of package, lawmakers, representatives, senators can defend their votes by saying, well, if I didn't pass this, the government would shut down, or all hell would break loose. And so they're able to shield themselves that way. So that's one reason why we have fewer bills. Bills, of course, are passed by the House and the Senate, and the President signs them. I think you know that. When do bills get introduced? What prompts bills being introduced? For one thing, perhaps the biggest thing, is early on in a presidential administration. I think you've all heard this honeymoon period where the first 100 days or first year of when the president has been elected, he wants to get things passed right away, and so a lot of bills are introduced early on in a presidential term. We know that presidents don't introduce bills, members of the House or Senate do, but that's when a lot of them come through. This can also happen when there's been a change in the control of either the House or the Senate. And so we've talked about 1995 when the Republicans took over. They've been out of power for a long time. They get into power. They want to get things done right away. And so this contract with America, I'm sure I got my preposition right, for America, they passed, I was like 8 or 9, 10 fairly significant reforms right away. Not all of them, which were bills. And you can have a major defining event. So whenever there is a problem that comes up, maybe there's been a big school shooting or something tragic like that, or the Paris attacks that we had a week or so ago in France. Well, now we got to introduce a bill to restrict the number of Syrians that come in, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of bills can come because some big event occurs, which prompts their passage, and they introduce it because they think the likelihood of that bill passing is improved by current events. All right. All right, referral of legislation is our next slide here. Usually it's routine. You have a parliamentarian. You all should know about this. It comes up for some reason in every single class, but these are individuals in the House and the Senate who know where the subject matter of a bill, what they know which committee it should go to. So each committee has a specified jurisdiction, and a lot of it is done through that. Formally, this is almost sort of an advisory role in the sense that in the House, the Speaker can override the parliamentarian. He can send it to any committee that he wants to. He's got to be careful about stepping on too many toes there, even though he is the Speaker. And the presiding officer in the Senate is the one who formally sends the bill to the committee of his choosing. Most of the time they follow what the parliamentarian offers, but this is a misleading. I should change this. President of Senate, no, that's not. That's the vice president. He's not the one who really does this. You have the president pro tempore, and that would be the person who, I guess, formally has this power. And even then, that's usually almost a ceremonial post. And in the Senate, they don't have near the sort of power that the leadership in the House does. We've talked about that already. Sometimes the referral of legislation is not routine. In 1964, you had the Civil Rights Act, which is going to is going to outlaw public discrimination, you know, school for blacks and school for whites, those kinds of things. And private discrimination, too, is going to be on its way out. So private sector individuals, hotels, things like that. And the way it was referred in the Senate and the way it was referred in the House differed. They are going to invoke in the text of this bill the Commerce Clause. And the Commerce Clause, as I believe we've talked about in this class, has been used to really expand the scope of congressional power, because they argue that this has some effect on commerce, therefore this falls under Congress's commerce power. And the story is that in the Senate, let me make sure I get my people right. I can't remember their names very well. Yes, so in 1963, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, because this is a civil rights bill. This would be a right that you have. These might be considered something that fell under the purview or jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. That's where you think it might go. But in the Senate, the guy who was the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee was James Eastland, who was a Democrat from Mississippi. And you know, Mississippi, they probably would not be very receptive to a civil rights bill in 1963. So they didn't want to send it there. So that since commerce was in the text, that was a justification for the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, that making it very difficult for blacks to travel and, you know, engage in commercial activities. This was slowing down, you know, commerce in the United States. Okay, probably not the a little bit of a tacky excuse, but nonetheless, the case could be made for it. And so they sent it in the Senate to the Warren Magnuson, who was the head of the Senate Commerce Committee. And Warren Magnuson was a Democrat from Oregon, and he was or Washington State, I should say, and he was a liberal on civil rights. In the House, it was the very opposite. In the House, the head of the Judiciary Committee, I have to look at him, Orrin Harris, and he was a Democrat from Arkansas, and the head of the Commerce Committee in the House, that was the Commerce Committee, the head of the Judiciary Committee was a guy named Emanuel Seller from New York, a Democrat, and so in the House they sent it to the Judiciary Committee, so just the opposite. So they can play a lot of tricks when referring legislation to different committees. And so they sort of stuck within the rules, but interpreted the problem of civil rights in a different way. One was like, oh, it's just fundamental rights, people should be able to use the same schools, what have you, and the other ones, well, it's also prohibiting blacks from full participation in American commercial life. Okay, now still legislative referral in the House prior to 1974. They used what was called sequential referral, and this would be that if a bill bills often have something to do with agriculture, but they could have something to do with commerce, and they could maybe even have something to do with national security. And there's a wide range of areas they could potentially cover. So if they covered more than one area, they could do what's called sequential referral. So they would let the Agricultural Committee see it first, and then it would move on to the Judiciary Committee, and what have you. It would go in sequence. And they also had what was called multiple referral that they introduced in 1974 as well. And because it was just taking so long. Remember I told you, 1960s, the New Deal, not the New Deal, the Great Society legislation, Congress is doing, or the government is doing a whole lot. So they're getting bogged down. The government's becoming much more complex. Problems are complex in society, and the government's going to tackle them. The resulting legislation is going to be complex and cover more jurisdictions. So they started permitting what's called multiple referral. In this case, they would send out the whole bill to each of these two different committees. All right? And so that was the way it worked. The Senate is a lot more loosey-goosey. You know, individual senators hold a lot of power, and committees don't have as much much ability to freeze out their competing committees. So the Senate is always going to refer to multiple committees. In 1995, I just mentioned the Republicans took over in the House. They changed a lot of stuff. And one of the things they're going to change is that no longer can the bill be, they're going to say multiple referral, we're going to stick with multiple referral, but we're going to cut the bill up. And you're going to get Agricultural Committee, the part of that bill that deals just with agricultural things. And Armed Services Committee, you're going to get that part of the bill that deals with things with armed services. I think that's a better way to do it, a lot less complex. It allows, keeps the cooks in their respective kitchens, so to speak. So, so that's the new. This is. I guess this to y'all seems like a long time ago, but this is really still kind of the way it is, whether Republicans or Democrats are in charge. There's this last thing called speaker discharge, and the speaker retains the right to set deadlines. So when the speaker refers these things multiply out to the different committees, he or she, if Pelosi, they can put a deadline and say, you have till October 18th to report out a bill. If you haven't reported out a bill, we're going to pull it out of your committee. So this deadline, the idea is that this would increase the pace of legislation, that they could get things done more quickly. What's our time now?
11:45.
Oh, okay. Let's stop right there.